Hello everyone, I hope today finds you very well. I must say a big thank you to those of you who've recently started subscribing to my channel. It's much appreciated, thank you. I am the introverted astrologer and today I'm bringing you my take on the British royal family. As you know, 2024 opened up with a couple of major health changes within the royal family. The lovely Princess Catherine had abdominal surgery. We were also informed that King Charles' treatment for cancer was just about to begin. So of course King Charles has stepped back from many of his duties and we don't officially have any more detail than that. Now, with astrology being the magnificent tool that it is, I can tell you that a few of the royal charts are bristling with activity. So we're going to have a look at the charts of a few key figures who are affected by this. What does the future look like? And we'll be paying careful attention to a few repeating themes which involve the Sun, Neptune, and a fixed malefic star called Algol, which has been caught up with the royal family for generations. I'm just going to put a gentle boundary around everything before we start. I don't personally believe in looking for death in a person's chart. I've never felt that any good would come of doing that. And so I just want to explain that this isn't what today's video is about. Let's go and have a look on the computer and see what's going on, starting with King Charles. So we can quickly establish that King Charles has been under some quite difficult, lengthy transits. And these have been to his lights, the Sun and Moon. And I do think it's possible that King Charles was experiencing health problems well before the announcement this February. For a start, he has been experiencing transiting Uranus in his 10th house, opposing his Sun. The first exact contact by Uranus would have been back in July of 2023, and with Uranus's retrograde motion, it will return to make another direct hit on his Sun in early May of 2024. Now, King Charles has a lot of fixed placements in his chart, including that Sun in the fixed sign of Scorpio. So it's unlikely that he will appreciate the flux and disruption that a transit from Uranus brings. We're going to be seeing the Sun quite a bit during this video. So what sort of things do we expect to see when the Sun in a person's chart is activated by transit or progression? Well, the Sun can be our core purpose, our identity, but it can also represent father, husband, our vitality. And a stressful Uranus aspect can be experienced as very shocking and jarring. Uranus can serve the purpose of breaking down habits, routines, stagnant patterns of living, which no longer serve our true purpose. And if we're a creature of habit, this can be experienced as chaotic, disruptive, shocking. But King Charles has been experiencing another disruptive and upsetting transit. Pluto began squaring his moon back in 2023, and Pluto is still moving backwards and forwards in the early degrees of Aquarius, and so this process is still ongoing. And when Pluto, the outermost planet, contacts the moon, our most vulnerable inner self, this can potentially bring a good deal of emotional upheaval. We can see from King Charles's moon in Taurus that he is security orientated. What sort of issues would we expect to be raked up under this transit? Well, the moon is an emotional body. It can represent the wife. It can also represent the mother, and sometimes it's our home. And this transit has been approaching during Charles's early months of grieving for his lost mother, and many other issues connected with our need to feel emotionally secure may have been presented to him during this transit. Will the king be experiencing any other major transits this year? Well, yes, he will, because as transiting Neptune moves into the very last minutes of Pisces, it will begin to square his Uranus and his Jupiter simultaneously. They're in a very tight opposition in his natal chart. And this transiting T-square situation will carry on even into 2026. The first point at which this contact will become exact is in June of 2024. And it isn't a very realistic looking energy. Neptune transits are often accompanied by a dissolving or softening of whatever Neptune touches. It can be a very spiritualizing transit in the long run, but initially Neptune transits by hard aspect are often very difficult. Our perception of reality can become quite distorted and unrealistic. And it's likely that Charles's belief systems and his expectations will become more refined as a result of this transit. But while he's in the thick of it, his perceptions may not be accurate. He may overestimate his own power and end up having his belief system slowly ground down and then reformulated as the transit continues. And in all this, Neptune will be trining his Chiron. And so in all the confusion, there is some potential for healing or enrichment. Will he be able to heal a broken ideal? Possibly a spiritual ideal. Another interesting development in King Charles's chart is that we can see his progressed moon has very recently conjuncted his progressed sun and is just starting to move away. When we progress a chart, the sun moves forward roughly 1 degree for every year of life. The progressed moon moves forward some 12 or 13 degrees each year. And at the point where the sun and the moon are exactly conjunct in the progressions, we call this the progressed new moon. These are very big cycles. We're talking some 27 or 28 years long, the unfolding of a major new chapter in life. In those final 2 or 3 years, where the progressed moon is bearing down on the progressed sun, but not quite conjunct, that final phase is called the balsamic phase. This is part of the phase that King Charles will have been in at the time of his mother's death. And last year too. It can be quite an unsettling phase because our life often becomes much more streamlined. It's preparing the soul for the next major chapter. It may be that we have to lose some of the things in our lives in preparation for the next phase. So we may see some pretty major life changes, loss, bereavement, which makes me wonder whether we have more change coming over the course of 2024 and 2025, which is where we live, what we do, our state of health. These can all change in readiness for the next major chapter. Now, Charles's progressed moon conjuncted his progressed sun exactly in February of 2024, and he is now officially in the new moon phase. This is the start of his next life chapter. Will King Charles be impacted by the solar eclipses this year? Well, the solar eclipse this spring will make a wide opposition to his natal Venus. We're just over 3 degrees out. I would see this eclipse as bringing quite a bright, inspirational kind of energy with it, and I'm hoping this won't be too much of a problem. However, there is a solar eclipse on the 2nd of October. This is at 10 degrees of Libra, so it will fall on his IC with an orb of just over 3 degrees. This eclipse energy may be a little bit more difficult. Something comes to completion at this time. There may be an element of sadness with it, and our physical energy may be quite low as the eclipse looms. We can also see that his progressed moon will be opposing his natal Pluto around this time too. I'm hoping that simultaneous trine to Neptune will help offset some of the difficulties of these few weeks. Another method of forecasting that we can use is solar arcs. Using this method, every planet in the chart is progressed roughly 1 degree for every year of life. And so this means that even very slow-moving outer planets will move a degree a year, and we then look at their relationship with the natal chart to establish events that are likely within a 12-month period. We need to be aware when we're using solar arcs that the energy expressed by the solar arc aspects could take place at any point within roughly a 1-year period. And using this method, we can see that a very sensitive point, which is King Charles's midheaven, is moving exactly to conjunct his Uranus and oppose his Jupiter. And that conjunction to Uranus and opposition to Jupiter is exact in February and March of 2024. And naturally we would expect significant disruption or change, which is indeed what has happened. His public role out in the world has had to fundamentally accommodate this change in health. His midheaven role has been disrupted by recent events. We do have a potentially quite difficult solar arc becoming exact later this year. This is that solar arc Saturn is going to conjunct the King's natal sun. It becomes exact in November of this year. We can't say exactly when this dynamic will play out, but we know this is a difficult aspect because the King's vitality and strength will be diminished by Saturn's presence. The King might feel that he is being tested to the limits. This isn't the sort of aspect that we could do with when we're not well anyway. It brings great weight and has poor connotations with health. We are going to look closely at King Charles and Algol shortly, but first we're going to have a look at the key players around him, starting with his wife, the Queen Consort Camilla. Now we know that Queen Camilla's birth time has been recorded from a biography or an autobiography, so it may not be exact. This is particularly relevant if you look at her Leo ascendant, because it means that transiting Pluto is moving up to conjunct her descendant, but not necessarily this year, because the ascendant is so time sensitive. If that birth time is out by just a few minutes, then it becomes difficult to predict exactly when Pluto will begin to conjunct that descendant. But I wanted to draw your attention to her progressed sun. As we've already mentioned, the sun can symbolise many things, and one of them can be the husband. Queen Camilla's progressed sun is moving to conjunct that natal Neptune. And the closer that the sun moves to exactitude, the stronger we could expect the influence to be. When Sun and Neptune come together in this way, there is that potential for confusion, for loss, for sacrifice. We can literally feel all at sea. Our purpose may feel that it is being eroded, and in all the Neptunian fog, it's difficult to comprehend what the outcome could be. If we allow a degree of awe, we can see that the progressed Sun has been about a degree away from her Neptune since 2023. And as we move further into 2024, we can see that the aspect reaches exactitude in September of this year. And even when the progressed Sun moves out of orb, it will then connect with her progressed Neptune. So this will be a long and disorientating influence. Now we can see that her progressed Mercury and her progressed Mars are drawing into a square position with each other. It isn't exact yet, but that progressed Mercury is the faster moving of the two, and it will have closed this gap exactly by June of this year. What would this tell us? It could speak about the pace of her life at the moment, which is probably fast, hasty. There could be an intensity of communication and interaction needed. There are many significations. Transiting Saturn will trine her Jupiter later this year in a lengthier transit, which will hopefully bring some more settled weather. We have a couple of interesting contacts in her solar arcs. One of them is that solar arc moon is just moving away from its connection with her natal Uranus by square. It may be that the energy of this has already been dispersed via the disruption that we're already aware of. And similarly, we can also see that solar arc Saturn connected with her sun in an aspect which was exact 2 or 3 months ago. Will Queen Camilla be affected by the eclipses this year? Yes, she probably will. The eclipse on the 2nd of October the same one that falls on King Charles's IC, will be conjunct her IC too. So again, we could be looking at energy levels that are quite low, a sense of sadness over something that is completed. Let's quickly move on and see how Prince William is being affected by all this. More than any other chart, this was the one that made me decide to use the Placidus house system to show you how he is being hammered by transits at the moment, and very difficult transits too. Neptune has been squaring his ascendant, and as Neptune slowly moves through the very final minutes of Pisces this year, it will begin squaring that Sun too. It's very difficult when Neptune squares our ascendant. The ascendant is a very sensitive point. We can lose any sense of certainty. The prevalent feeling may be one of confusion, and we're simply not sure what direction to take next. There could be deception by us or others. There could be loss or sacrifice. And we can also see his natal Sun-Neptune opposition straddling that ascendant-descendant axis. We may have had historic difficulties with boundaries around self-identity, and this transit will bring those themes up again. That Neptune square to his ascendant first became exact back in 2023, but it becomes exact again this year, in March 2024, i.e. this month, and again in November of 2024. We can sometimes find that the way ahead becomes clearer at a time when Neptune stations about to turn direct, and in this case that transiting Neptune stations at the end of this year, on the 8th of December, at 27 degrees and 8 minutes of Pisces, and it will gradually begin to move away from the sensitive area of his ascendant. However, Neptune will continue to make that square aspect with Prince William's natal Sun and become exact again next January in 2025. So it may be that Prince William's sense of his life purpose, his identity and direction will still feel unclear until this transit is over. It is these sort of Neptune contacts that make me wonder whether Prince William actually wants the job of being king, or whether he's filled with uncertainty about this role. We can also see that with that midheaven around 2 degrees of Scorpio, transiting Pluto in early Aquarius will be squaring that too. It's already been squaring his Jupiter on his midheaven for some time, and that transit will become exact again in August and December of this year. I think this transit is important because the midheaven is obviously a very sensitive point, but both Pluto and Jupiter are conjunct his midheaven in his natal chart. This is an aspect that we could associate with worldly success, with the ability to draw plenty in life towards us, a natural ability to wield power wisely, a prominent public role, one requiring determination and faith. However, Pluto's transits are transits by square, and it's that square which can make us feel compelled or forced into a course of action that wouldn't normally be of our choosing. So we can experience feelings of powerlessness, of being coerced or forced into an action or direction that we do not want. So I think William could be very much questioning where he is going. He's moving through a period of intense confusion and uncertainty. He may be feeling like he is being steamrolled into a direction that he's not sure he wants to take yet. And perhaps what he does want will become clearer to him as Neptune clears away. But we have quite some months remaining before that can happen. We can see that transiting Uranus is going to conjunct that natal Venus in June of this year. Uranus transits can be very stimulating, invigorating. The pace of life can feel like it accelerates dramatically. But we may also experience some disruption as a result of this transit, particularly with that natal opposition between Venus and Uranus, and Chiron nearby too. We may experience a fresh wounding through our relationships, which brings back echoes from the past of historic relationship wound. and presents us with fresh opportunities to examine these wounds. Our intrinsic values, what we hold dear, could also be up for examination between June of this year and spring of 2025. If we turn to Prince William's progressions, we can see that his progressed Jupiter is slowly closing that gap between its natal position and his midheaven. In his natal chart, Jupiter is just under 2 degrees away from being exactly conjunct to his midheaven. But progressed Jupiter is slowly perfecting that gap, and it is now just 8 minutes away. This is part of an aspect formation where we could assume that Prince William would one day be king. And as that aspect perfects itself, does this mark a time when that ascension will take place? It perfects itself later in 2025, and one would assume honours or success in career at this time. But is this something that Prince William actually wants? We have a couple of other aspects in his progressions which indicate success and high energy, because his progressed Mars has slowly been inching forward and drawing closer to his natal Jupiter. Mars is one of the rulers of his midheaven, and this is another very dynamic aspect, a time of motivation, high energy, a positive aspect. And as it moves closer to Jupiter, it will also fall into an exact trine with his natal Sun. That aspect won't become exact this year, but it will gradually gain more strength as we move into 2025 and early 2026. So we can see a strong application of energy and determination unfolding in these progressions. How will William be impacted by the eclipses this year? Both himself and his wife, Princess Catherine, are born under eclipses, and we would expect their charts to be quite sensitive to eclipse energy. Well, October's eclipse will fall on his natal Mars, which is around 9 degrees of Libra. The eclipse is at around 10 degrees, so we have quite a strong connection with a personal planet there. And if we have a look at the chart of the lovely Princess Catherine, we can see there that October's eclipse will affect her chart too, because she similarly has a Mars in Libra. I had noticed that when the announcement was made about King Charles and his impending cancer treatment, Princess Catherine was still resting at home and recovering from her surgery. Her progressed moon was exactly squaring her natal Pluto at the time, testimony to the stress and disruption that she was experiencing then. But a very interesting development in Princess Catherine's chart relates to her progressed Mars. We can see that in her natal chart, Mars squares her Sun and her Moon. That Sun and Moon are in tight opposition, and they straddle her 6th and 12th houses. The 6th house represents our health, amongst other things. A 12th house is a place of seclusion, of hospitals, sometimes of illness. When Princess Catherine was born, her Mars was moving direct, but in her progressed chart, by the time we got to January of this year, that progressed Mars turned retrograde. And by this point, it was within a degree of squaring both the Sun and the Moon. Now, because progressed Mars is moving retrograde, its motion is very slow. And so this whole dynamic of Mars in a T-square with that natal Sun and Moon will be ongoing. We can't be certain of Princess Catherine's birth time because it comes from somebody's memory, and that time of 7 o'clock in the evening sounds a bit too exact. But if we look at the position of her progressed ascendant at this time, we can see it's moving through the very last minutes of forming a perfect trine with her natal Sun. I think this bodes very well for her recuperation from her recent surgery. If we look at Princess Catherine's progressed Moon at the moment, it's moving through the last few degrees of Capricorn, but it is shortly going to enter the sign of Aquarius. She has Aquarius on her 7th house cusp. This means her formal relationships are going to take on more importance. More importantly though, her progressed moon is slowly bearing down on her progressed sun. So we know that Princess Catherine is going to have a progressed new moon soon. It won't happen until 2027, but these next couple of years leading up to that may be very unsettling for her. She will be entering into the balsamic phase of the lunation cycle, the same phase that King Charles has just emerged from. And we know that in this final phase, things in our life that we take for granted can change as we are reoriented towards beginning a new cycle. Luckily, Princess Catherine is not being overwhelmed by transits from the outer planets this year in the same way that her husband is. I had mentioned earlier that the fixed star Algol seems to repeatedly play an important part in the charts of the royal family, and there is a history of this repeating over many generations. You might be interested in an excellent article written by the astrologer Alex Trenoweth, which has been published in the Astrological Journal, and I shall put the link for this article in the comments. Alex has backtracked on the position of Algol over hundreds of years, looking at its position in the charts of previous kings. But Algol still features prominently in our current generation of the royal family and in the late Queen Elizabeth and Princess Diana's charts too. So we'll start by quickly recapping on the meaning of Algol. It's actually a binary star system, and it has the most dreadful reputation handed down over the years. It's previously been described as the most malefic star in the heavens, and it causes hangings, death by loss of one's head, and any other foul demonic deed. And whilst it has indeed been around at the time, for example, when Charles I was beheaded, our interpretation of it has changed over time. So Algol is seen as containing immense passion and power, and those of you who have personal planets or points tightly caught up with very narrow orbs to Algol may identify with the idea that this star brings strong consuming passion, so intense that it can devour you up with its anger and its rage. And if used positively, there's a potential for strong, intense sexual energy. But if this is repressed, then we can have rage, violence, the more negative expression of Algol. Algol moves around 1.5 degrees every century against the backdrop of the stars. Now we're having a look at 4 of the royal family members, and we're specifically honing in on the Taurus-Scorpio axis. And we can see how Algol features in these natal charts. So, for example, Queen Elizabeth has Algol there on her IC, closely opposed by that Saturn in Scorpio. King Charles, in turn, has a sun at 22 degrees of Scorpio. Princess Diana had Venus closely conjuncting Algol. And Prince William has that tight Venus-Chiron conjunction on Algol. These are just a few family members, but we know that a couple of Prince William's children also have tight connections with Algol in their charts too. Now there's certainly a case for stating that Algol features prominently at key critical events in royal family lives, be it by transit, solar return, progression. So here we have the solar return of Princess Diana, and this is set up for the year when she tragically lost her life. Now if you look to the sign of Taurus in the chart on the left, which is the standalone solar return, you can see that the moon in the solar return chart is tightly caught up there with Algol. And if you look at the chart on the right, the inner chart is her natal chart, and we have the solar return planets around it. And so you can see that solar return moon conjunct her Venus Algol combination. We'll be looking at just a couple of other solar returns, and I'll mention briefly that I've set them all for London because the royal family are scattered across various residences in the outer London borough. and there is very little difference between them in terms of affecting the ascendant. And here we have the solar return for Queen Elizabeth in the year where she peacefully passed away. The lunar eclipse that had taken place in May of 2022 landed on 25 degrees of Scorpio, so you can see from the Queen's natal chart on the right how closely this picked up on her personal points. And here we have the solar return chart for King Charles on his 76th birthday. This is based at some point in the future, so I've set it for London, and perhaps you can see from the standalone chart on the left why I'm raising the issue of Algol. Transiting Uranus this year will be conjuncting Algol, and we have Charles's Scorpio sun caught up in this combination. And it is this which makes me wonder whether we have more change coming over the course of 2024 and 2025. I hope you've enjoyed watching this. With all the Neptune going on, I think things are going to be unsettled for some time yet. We're not out of the woods, and this is probably more serious than we're being told. But until next time, do take very good care of yourselves.